In the novel Dracula, Bram Stoker wrote, "We learn from failure, not from success." Well, Sony and Marvel will learn a whole lot from this movie. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Morbius. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair from the 80s Flick Flashback podcast, he is here to end our season with our just unofficial... This just happened. Right. And it always seems we end our season with a really bad movie, and we did it on purpose this time. But please welcome Tim Williams. How are you, Tim?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for choosing me, sir. Thank you.
Hey, I have alternated between you and Nicholas. It was you. You year one. It was Nicholas year two. And so, yeah, you year one. So for those of you who haven't kept up, end of year one, it ended up being me and Tim doing Bloodshot.
Right.
With Vin Diesel. And then end of year two, I did the Hulk.
Right.
With Nicholas Pepin. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I have ended every season. This is our last episode. I do them for a full year. Mm-hmm. It's a season for me. And we've ended our year with a bad movie. So I was like, okay, you know what? It's now, we got to go 3 and make this thing a tradition now. So Tim and I got together and we said, you know, what better bad movie than Morbius?
Yes.
All right. So let me talk about the release and then I'm going to ask you how you saw this.
Okay.
So this movie was supposed to be released July 10th, 2020. Mm-hmm. Then that was changed to July 31st. Then March 19th, 2021. Then October 8th, 2021. Then January 21st, 2022. Then January 28th. And finally, unironically, it was released on April Fool's Day, 2022. April 1st, 2022. But then it hit Netflix is September 7th of 2022. So finally released in theaters after 2 years on April 1st, 2022, but then hit Netflix September 7th, 2022. And then went, but I forgot to mention this, but went back to the theaters
right
in June. So before the Netflix release, it went back into theaters in June 3rd of 2022. Dear God. Okay. So I will ask you, how did you first see this movie? Did you happen to see it in theaters? Did you see it in theaters one of the 2 times, or did you not see it till it came out on Netflix?
Netflix. I waited till Netflix.
I saw this on the flight to Seattle.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. I remember you talking about it.
When Chad and I, for those of you who are fans of the show, you know, Chad lives in Alaska. Chad and I, huge Braves fans, we actually decided to meet for a Seattle Mariners game against the Braves. And it was actually the weekend right after it was released on Netflix. And it was one of the free movies on the plane. Mm-hmm. And so that is how I watched Morbius, was on the 5-hour flight to Seattle. So, and that's how good this movie, it is worthy of being watched on a plane. This is, yeah. When you have when you are confined in one location,
right,
and you have very few choices,
and you can't get on your phone and check social media while you're watching it because there's no service up there. So yeah, you're pretty much locked into that for those.
And I say hours. Very few choices. I will say there were a lot of choices of movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, when I hadn't seen it yet, so here, why not? Let's watch it.
That's how I watched the last Jurassic World after I missed the theater, tried to watch it on Peacock or Paramount, whichever one it was on, and made it like 30 minutes
Peacock,
in. Yeah. Peacock. And then I was on a 13-hour flight, I don't know, coming back from Israel. And I was like, well, this movie's a good 3 hours long. This will be a good one to watch. And I finished it and actually thought it wasn't as bad as I remembered. So
yes, but thank God Morbius is not 3 hours long. It is 1 hour and 44 minutes, and
as it should be.
Thank you to Sony and Marvel for making this 1 hour and 44 minutes.
I'm going to say that with a little bit of an asterisk because maybe it didn't need to be longer, but there were some parts of the story that we needed that are missing that make it feel like a skeleton of what it could be and not a full-fledged story.
Okay, well, we can get into
yeah,
that.
We'll get into that. Yeah.
So this was directed by Daniel Espinosa, who I had never heard of, so I looked him up. So this was only his third, like, American movie.
Okay.
Were you familiar with it? Are you familiar with?
No.
Okay. So he directed Safe House, the Ryan Reynolds, Denzel Washington.
I like that movie a lot.
That one was pretty good.
Yeah.
That was pretty good. Then he directed Life, that space movie with Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
Not great.
No.
I saw that one. Not great. And then now Morbius. So, yeah, he's going to have to up his game a little bit more. But let's go ahead and get into the characters. We'll run through the list and then go back and talk about whoever we want to talk about. So first off, we've got Dr. Michael Morbius, played by Jared Leto, stepping away, I guess, from being the Joker. Morbius, first introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man 101 in October of 1971, created by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. Roy Thomas, we've talked about these guys before. I mean, Roy Thomas created Ghost Rider. He created Man-Thing, Luke Cage. He partly helped create Wolverine. And then, along with Gil Kane, the artist, they both created Iron Fist and Adam Warlock.
Okay.
So they've got some characters under their belt.
Some good characters,
then you have the most confusing character name, Lucian, but also Milo.
Yeah.
And in the credits, he's credited as Milo Morbius, which makes even less sense.
I didn't even notice that, but that does make no sense.
I guess because they're quote-unquote brothers. I don't know. Character completely created for the movie.
Okay.
Played by Doctor Who himself, Matt Smith. Mm-hmm. Then you got Martine Bancroft, played by, and I will probably butcher this, Adria Arjona.
Sure.
Or Arjona. I don't know. But this character is from the comics, Amazing Spider-Man 102. So the very next comic from when Morbius is introduced in November of 71. Then we got Emil Nicholas, played by Jared Harris, which we can come back around to this, but he kind of is from the comics because he's using a name that's from the comics, which is Emil Nikos.
Okay.
From Amazing Spider-Man 102, same as Martine from November 1971. Then you've got Simon Stroud, played by Tyrese Gibson, who also is from the comics. First appearance was Creatures on the Loose number 30 in April of 1974. And then finally, the only other person worth talking about is Agent Alberto Rodriguez, played by the very funny Al Madrigal. So we can go back and talk about some of these, but I'll go ahead and ask you the question. So of this cast, who do you want to see again, and who do you wish would take a stake straight through the heart?
Ooh, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and I was starting to ponder, but I didn't really land on anyone in particular. Let me get some clarification. Are we talking about the character or the actor or both, or does it matter?
So I would say the character most definitely.
Gotcha.
But trying to pair the character with the actor's performance of that character.
Yeah. I'll say this up front. I'm not a big Jared Leto fan. I never really have been. But I don't mind him in this that much. I think once he kind of gets into the full character of who, Dr. Morbius is, once he's got his transformation, I could roll with it a little bit better. So I would not mind seeing a sequel that's better than this with still Jared Leto as Morbius. I would be okay with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm right there with you. Like, I don't think Jared Leto is a bad Morbius. Mm-hmm. He was a bad Joker.
Yes.
But I don't think he's a bad Morbius. Mm-hmm. I think the character's written poorly. Mm-hmm. I don't think he had I'm kind of with you in terms of Jared Leto as an actor. I don't know how I feel about Jared Leto as an actor, but it it worked for me, at least, as him as Michael Morbius. Now, again, I have my problems with the character and with the way he was written and with some of the stuff they decided. So, yeah, that's my thought about this. But who would you want to stake through the heart?
Everybody else. I'm just kidding.
Everybody.
No, the Milo character was just, now you saying that he wasn't from the comics, he was created for the movie, makes sense of why it's such, a great, these kind of movies, you have to have a great villain. And I didn't feel like he was a great villain. And I'm not a Doctor Who person, so Matt Smith is not someone that I'm very familiar with his work. I'm not saying he necessarily I don't know if it says he did a bad job or just a bad character or mix of both. But that was the character. I would say number one. I mean, he's not going to come back again because he dies at the end. But I also felt like,
or does he?
Right? Yeah. But I also didn't feel like the Tyrese's character and the other guy, like the cops, detectives, like they're there, but they're really not essential. Like if they weren't in the movie at all, would it have made any sense? And
yeah. So here's my thing about Tyrese's character. So Simon Stroud in the comics, he's just a mercenary. He's not an FBI agent as he is in this one. He's a mercenary, but he was trained by the CIA. And he's kind of a character that hunts down kind of the Marvel, creatures.
Gotcha.
So like Man-Wolf, and Morbius. I don't know if he also has gone after Werewolf by Night, but yes, Werewolf by Night and Man-Wolf are two different characters.
Thanks for clarifying.
So I would be interested in seeing him some more if they made him kind of like the Agent Coulson character.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Of this darker, horror maybe aspect. Maybe him being the connection if they're going to go forward with this Sinister Six stuff, which we will get into later. That maybe he had, because they do, when they first show up and they see the carnage, it is actually Agent Rodriguez who says, I haven't seen anything like this since that incident in San Francisco.
Right.
And he's talking about Venom. That's Venom.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've got that now, that connection. So I think having him be kind of the intertwine between some of the characters, I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, and I felt like they were being introduced to be used further down the line.
Yeah.
But still not enough to feel like they were necessary in this movie.
Oh no, they're definitely, yeah. But again, that's where you were talking about the length of this movie. Like it just yeah, because even at the part where he first tracks down or chases after Morbius, when Morbius attacks them in the lobby.
Yeah.
And Morbius is about to fly, like he's learning about his, or not abilities, learning, but he's getting pushed by the wind. Because in the comics, it's his bones are hollow, like a bird. So he's able to glide on the wind. They don't really explain it that well in the movie. But then you've got Agent Stroud who pointing the gun at him, and I'm thinking, okay, then Morbius is gonna jump off the building. But no, he's now locked up. So yeah, there's a lot. Now, I will say I did read that apparently his character was supposed to have like a robotic arm.
Okay.
Which, if you remember at the beginning when he introduces himself, he does say, "Your synthetic blood helped save my arm."
Yeah,
So there is the reference to it. And he's always wearing long sleeves, so you never can actually see his arm. But apparently there was supposed to be some sort of robotic arm that had these capabilities. But according to an interview I read with Tyrese, apparently all the scenes were cut.
Yeah, that's what this movie feels like.
So much was cut.
Yeah, I think it was re-edited too many times, and they did different shots because of the delays and stuff.
And I know some of the edits also had to do with where the Spider-Man character was at the time. Because there was, in the trailers, there was one shot of Morbius walking by a Spider-Man poster.
Yeah.
and it's saying murderer across it, which of course connects to the end of Far From Home.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I still didn't get though, like, why did it disconnect? But again, we are going to get into all of that because I've got a whole bunch of notes on that.
I'm trying not to get us there too fast.
So I will talk a little bit more about Martine. So in the comics, Martine is just Morbius's fiance, like right from the get-go.
Okay.
Not a colleague, but they are together. They're engaged. Mm-hmm. She is on the boat when he turns. But his colleague, his assistant, is actually the Emil Nikos.
Okay.
Which is, like I said, but in this movie, that's their father figure doctor that
right
kind of tends to them when they're young. In the comic, after Morbius turns, he actually attacks and kills Emil. I won't get into further comics. You know, Emil didn't stay dead, but
of course not.
But Martine is Morbius then flees. Martine's left on the boat, and that's all you know of Martine until later in the comics that Morbius is in. She returns, but she is now part of this cult that is hunting down Morbius. Like, she's been brainwashed. It's so weird.
Yeah.
She eventually, as this movie does, she does eventually become a vampire.
Right.
So she becomes a vampire just like Morbius, but then Morbius cures her, and it's one of those things where he only had one dose of the cure, and he chose to use it on her instead of himself.
Right.
Then she's killed, so she's human again. Then she's killed again, and then I can't remember if it's Morbius, but she's resurrected using the Darkhold.
Okay.
Again, nobody stays dead in comics.
Of course not.
So she's resurrected using the Darkhold. Then she becomes a true vampire. Now, that's another aspect of this movie that we'll talk about some more, that they don't really lay on too much. They kind of tiptoe around it. Is that Morbius, and I guess you could also say Milo, aren't true vampires.
Mm-hmm.
They are what is, in the comics, Morbius is called the living vampire. But back to Martine. Martine is turned into an actual vampire. And then she is in a battle with Morbius and Spider-Man. And Spider-Man goes to stake her, realizes he can't do it, because essentially that would be killing her. He can't do it. And long story short, Morbius ends up just pushing Martine into the stake that Spider-Man is holding.
Okay.
And so now Martine, as of now, in the comics, is done and gone. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens if they do decide to go further with these stories, since we do see Martine's eyes reopen.
Like, right.
Is this going to be the version of her that's just like Morbius, or is this going to be a version of her that is going to be a villain, like the comic book character eventually turned into? I don't know. But yeah, none of these characters were interesting.
No.
Just putting it out there. Absolutely none. And I think that's all I want to talk about, the characters, because I want to talk about this story.
Yes. All right, go for it. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels. First thing I want to talk about is where Morbius came from. Before Morbius was created, there was the Comics Code Authority. Mm-hmm. That's the little stamp you see on comic books. This was self-censorship by the Comics Magazine Association of America. They were trying to get ahead of public concern. This was back in the 50s, maybe even late 40s, when parents were just saying, comics are evil. And there was this book, I forgot the title of the book, but this one doctor wrote a book that pretty much showed that comic books were ruining
the minds
adolescents. And and so there were the book burnings and all that of comic books, which is why comics of those times are so valuable.
Gotcha.
Not a lot of them in existence. So the Comic Magazine Association of America created this Comics Code Authority. And when they did it, part of the code, again, there was a lot to it, but to talk about what I'm focusing on, part of the code was that they banned vampires, werewolves, and zombies.
Okay.
So those could not be in comic books anymore. Now, take it into the 1971, they revise it, and they say, okay, we're going to allow these type of characters, and so like, for instance, vampires, as long as they resembled the literary version. Now, of course, who is the literary version of a vampire?
Dracula.
That's Dracula. And Roy Thomas wanted to introduce Dracula into the Spider-Man comics. Stan Lee, legendary Stan Lee, as the editor of Marvel, said no. He wanted their own character, and he wanted a villain that Marvel could have as their own. So they created Morbius. Now, to tie this in, and this would be really interesting to see if you know this. So Morbius is inspired by a 1957 movie called The Vampire. Okay. Are you familiar with the movie?
Vaguely, yes.
Okay.
I've heard of it, yeah.
So there's a movie from 1957 called The Vampire, and in the movie, the main character is a physician. He's a doctor. And he inadvertently, because his daughter unknowingly gives him the pill, he inadvertently ingests a pill that is laced with the blood of vampire bats.
Okay.
So, again, his daughter accidentally gives him that, thinking it's his, I think, migraine medicine. And he takes it, and it eventually turns him into a vampire. Mm-hmm. He even resembles what Morbius did with that kind of upturned nose. Yeah. So it's a very similar look. And this is where we got Morbius. So if anyone is interested, go Google The Vampire 1957. Take a look at this character. You can see where the look of the character Morbius was inspired. And then also, again, that origin. A doctor who, through some sort of medicine, quote unquote, that is made with vampire bat's blood, turns him into a vampire. So there you go. Now, of course, Dracula did eventually show up. He even had his own comic. Right. Marvel created the Tomb of Dracula in 1972, and that eventually connected with Blade, and it would all go full circle originally. All right, so let's get into this. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start on just this movie, or do you want to go ahead and get into the Spider-Man connection?
Let's do the Spider-Man connection.
Let's just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off.
Right.
All right. Is this or is this not the Spider-Man universe? Is there a Spider-Man in this universe?
I don't know. And that's why it's kind of weird. And see, this is where I think, the movie had problems, and why I think the edits were made is this movie was supposed to come out before Spider-Man No Way Home. Correct?
I believe so.
I think originally. So
again, with all those dates I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
So, because I remember some of the earlier trailers, there were scenes with Morbius and Michael Keaton's character, the
Adrian Toomes,
right? They had more interaction in those trailers than we see in the movie.
Okay,
so we have that. Yeah.
Now that you're in that, let's talk. So, and I mean, dear God, everybody knows. Spoiler alert. Okay,
yeah.
So the credit scene, which really you could say both credit scenes are kind of tied together.
Yeah. which I thought was weird why they separated them.
Yeah. So the credit scene, you first get the rip in the sky that's very reminiscent of No Way Home. And then Adrian Toomes is in a prison cell in a prison jumpsuit, which is what made the scene even more confusing. Because him looking around and then saying, well, I hope the food's better in here. And then the news report saying that a man by the name of Adrian Toomes just appeared in what was supposed to be an empty cell, which means he's not in his own universe.
Right.
Which, once you've seen No Way Home, doesn't make sense to that ending, because the whole point of the ending was everyone was sent back to their universe.
Does it, though? Because don't we get the extra credit scene of Venom showing up?
Yes, but then he disappears back to his universe.
Gotcha.
That's showing that he was in, I'll call it our universe.
Right.
He was in our universe. He just didn't get involved in all of the stuff.
Yeah.
And then it shows him get taken away. And of course, there is the one little piece of symbiote that's left. That was the big tease there.
Right.
So the fact that all of that is said in that first scene, you're going, okay, well, then somehow he ended up coming from our universe into this universe. Okay, then you've got the next credit scene,
right?
Which continues that, shows Morbius going to the middle of nowhere in a car, and then Toomes shows up as Vulture. So then my question was, where did he get the equipment?
Yes, that was my first question, because like, well, if the Avengers weren't in this timeline, he wouldn't have got all of the tech that he needed to create that suit.
Yes. So that was my next question. How did he get the suit? And then when he mentions
Spider-Man,
I think Spider-Man, all of a sudden Morbius goes, well, this sounds intriguing. Why does it sound intriguing, Morbius? Do you know who Spider-Man is?
Right.
Do you know what's going on? And didn't this movie just set you up as a good guy? Like, I'm so confused.
Yeah. Well, it's the same problem that Venom has, where both of the Venom movies, it's like Venom itself is kind of evil, but then Eddie Brock is not, and trying to reconcile that, kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of a, story. Yeah, that's why these movies are problematic. It's like you want to have this Sinister Six, but you can't give them their own movies where you make the bad guys the good guy.
Yeah. So the whole Sinister Six thing makes no sense, especially when now through both No Way Home and through this movie, you're kind of implying that there is no Spider-Man in this universe.
Right.
Because there is so much of a connection with Spider-Man.
Wait. And then two, because wasn't the end of No Way Home that he wiped out the memory of Spider-Man, so there was no Spider-Man?
No. He wiped out the memory of Peter Parker.
Parker being Spider-Man. Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
No one knows who Peter Parker is.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. All right.
So
it's been a while. It's been a while.
Just thinks Spider-Man.
Right. He doesn't know that it's Peter Parker.
He doesn't, even though he did.
In the original. Yeah, I got you.
I guess you were to assume he doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Okay. It's been a while since I watched that one, so I needed some clarification.
So yeah, I don't know if, because this all goes back to the Sony Marvel relationship. The fact that the Sony Spider-Man universe, which is what I think they officially call it, is technically separate from the MCU. And they only have the little overlap with Tom Holland Spider-Man himself, which of course then they melded even more by having Tom Hardy appear in that end credit scene. And now you've got Adrian Toomes, but that would still be the Sony universe. So you've got this Sony universe, which again would make you believe that Toomes is from the MCU, and I'm talking about universe here.
Right.
He's from the MCU since he battled the Tom Holland that is part of the MCU. But Venom and Morbius are part of the Sony Spider-Man universe. Now Vulture is in the Sony Spider-Man universe, but there's no indication there's a Spider-Man.
Right. But what if the Spider-Man they find is a totally
not Tom Holland,
is a totally different Peter Parker? Yeah.
I mean, fingers crossed. Maybe this is how they bring Miles Morales.
Yeah. I was just about to say that too. Yeah.
But I will say, how do you do? Do you do the fans any service by having the Sinister Six fight not Peter Parker?
Right.
I don't know.
It's problematic on so many levels.
It is. And it's going to make me frustrated. So let's go ahead and just talk about Morbius.
Yeah.
And let's leave the Spider-Man stuff alone.
Yeah.
So loads of differences here with the comic. I'll hit a few really quick, and then we'll focus on one primary one. So first off is, of course, the look of the character. In the comics, Morbius, no offense to Gil Kane for drawing him. Morbius is ugly as a human. He already has the upturned nose and the ghoulish face.
Gotcha.
And so they don't do the whole, he looks one way human and then he looks like a monster.
Mm-hmm.
All they really did was when he turns into a vampire, he just gets of course, gets the white skin and gets the fangs, and his eyes are kind of reddish and a little bit more bug-eyed. He looks a little bit more like a ghoul skeleton, but he still looked ugly as a human. Here's my question, though. Why the abs? Like, why does Morbius need abs? There's no reason for Morbius to need it. In the comic, he's a weakling, or he's not a weak. He's frail looking, even as the vampire. Like, I didn't get the
I think that was just
the Captain America bit.
Yeah, I think it was just the because it's a movie and you're trying to draw a certain audience, that was going to be eye candy for drawing female demographics to it. And I think it's trying to show, and then like the same thing with not the Tom Holland Spider-Man, but going back to the Tobey Maguire. The transformation of the puny, not in shape kid then being like all buff and muscular. Yeah.
Which again, his illness. So in the comics, he just has a blood disease. Like there's no physical ailment to him.
Gotcha.
He's got a blood disease that is killing him. So again, that you already have that, and they do the spoilers to an even older movie. They do the Kaiser Soze reveal with Matt Smith with Milo,
right?
And they do that even though they later show Matt Smith's abs, but they do that reveal by just showing him leave the cane and then start walking straight.
Right.
So yeah, I was against that. Now there's also the jumpsuit. Now, are you familiar with what the character looks like in the comics?
No.
Okay.
I probably should have looked at some pictures, but I didn't.
Yeah, in the comics, he has this red and blue jumpsuit. It's blue with red trim. It's got a pop collar.
Of course.
You kind of think of the
Dracula
cape,
right?
But his is actually on his suit. Has the pop collar. It has an open V-neck that goes down to his abs. But again, no abs on Morbius. But he has this V-neck. I will say, I think they paid a nod to it in the both opening and closing credit with the top of the M.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you noticed, it was primarily red and blues.
I did notice that, yeah.
As it was coming at you. So I think that was kind of a nod to the original suit. Then he has a cape, quote unquote. Pretty much when he spreads his arms out, he has what kind of looks like the bat wings.
Okay.
Kind of like, but it's attached. Like it's only when he puts his arms out that you get that part. And what's so funny is the way they explained it in the comic books is it was the bodysuit he had up under the suit he had to wear for the experiment, because the experiment involved electricity and it was to help conduct the electricity. Why he never changes out of that suit, I don't know. Once he turns into a vampire, but that's how they explain the suit in the comics. So we didn't get that. We just had him in all black in this one. It was fine. I mean, you're modernizing, you're updating it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's totally fine. Now, Power-wise, to hit this one really quick, powers were roughly the same, except in the comic books, to my knowledge. Now, I will say I'm not a huge Morbius aficionado, but to my knowledge, Morbius does not have the echolocation ability.
Okay.
That him and Milo have in this.
Mm-hmm.
He does sense body heat, so he can kind of tell where someone is based off body heat.
Okay.
But he doesn't have the echolocation ability. He also has no relationship with bats.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting.
He doesn't have this brotherhood, as he explains in the movie. And then there were some things that I will say, I think were a turn that worked for the movie. So, for instance, when he becomes Morbius, the vampire Morbius, in the comic, it happens on a private yacht. He then, as I mentioned earlier, he kills his partner, Emil. He realizes what he's done. He escapes. He ends up on another ship. Like, he's found by this crew of another ship as he's floating out in the ocean. And eventually he ends up killing all of them. And then he ends up in New York and fights Spider-Man. I do like this, where it's one boat.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at least mercenaries, and so we're not supposed to
feel bad
that he's killing them all.
Right.
So I was okay with that. I was okay with that. The other thing that I thought was interesting was the whole artificial blood. So I like how they just pull that out of thin air, right smack in the middle of the movie, that he has invented artificial blood. He gets a Nobel Prize for it.
Right.
Which he apparently
turned down.
Are we to assume he turns it down?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because she says you disrespected the king of Sweden, or whatever it was. So in the comic, Morbius does discover when he bites Spider-Man that Spider-Man's blood can actually cure him of his vampirism.
Okay. Because
of Spider-Man's mutation. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it brings back his blood disease.
Gotcha.
So he of course does not allow that to stay, and turns himself back into the living vampire. During the Midnight Suns run, which I am so hoping they eventually can do something with Midnight Suns. I want Midnight Suns. Disney Plus, Marvel, listen to me. I want Midnight Suns. But during the Midnight Suns run, he is injected with a serum. I'm not sure what's really in the serum, but I do know that it's mixed with demon blood. It's the blood of Lilith. And that mutates him, so it becomes more monster-like. But his sanity and personality are restored.
Okay.
So he's not the monster. He looks more like a monster, but he doesn't have the bloodlust, which is what the character is all about, which they tease around.
Right. It's not as clear.
Yeah, that's a much bigger thing with the character in the comic. Then later in the comics, he uses Spider-Man's blood again and creates another serum. And this is what I think gave the writers the idea of the artificial blood. So the serum that he creates from Spider-Man's blood does allow him to restore his human form, but only for a few hours.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of where that's probably the closest thing that we get.
Right.
So there is your movie comic connection as best. But again, that would require Spider-Man,
which they couldn't do.
Yeah. So I will say, though, I do like the artificial blood, and then real blood, and the real blood makes you more like a vampire, more
monster,
animalistic, and although at the same time also makes you stronger. So I did like that. I'm not going to go against that. I mean, they did it in Blade, where Blade had his own little serum.
Right.
That he took. So I'm good with that. And if they wanted to even continue that in when Marshall Ali shows up as Blade, and maybe Morbius, he and Morbius have that connection where he's using Michael Morbius's artificial blood as the serum, I'm all good with that. Mm-hmm. Of course, that would also throw a kink into the whole, what universe are we in?
Right.
So, but you got any thoughts? I mean, this is, I'm trying not to just bash this movie.
Yeah, and it's not great, but it is watchable, I guess you could say. I mean, it did
at an hour and 44 minutes. Yes,
yeah,
it moves.
Yeah, I think it feels like a very paint by numbers type of superhero movie.
Absolutely.
It just feels like everything is recycled from every other superhero movie that we've seen before, which I think is why it fell so flat, because there was nothing making it original. This is the question I was going to ask. Do you think this movie would have been better had they gone... Doesn't even know the question. Like, do you think it being PG-13 hurt it?
No.
Okay. But like if they would lean more into like the horror side or...
Nah.
Okay.
I don't think that would have helped it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the opening scene with that really fake looking cave
right.
That they're walking up on. I mean, that looks like you took it straight out of a 90s, like you took it straight out of the Congo.
Yeah.
The Congo movie. Where it was clearly a fake soundstage area. No, I don't think... I mean, obviously I would love to see the stuff go more into the horror, but you've got to have a good enough story first.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you on the whole by the numbers thing. That was my whole problem with Milo.
Yeah.
Is that you introduce Milo, you introduce him as he's the best friend, which you immediately go,
he's gonna
villain.
He's gonna turn to be the bad guy. Yeah, exactly.
Especially when they have the quick moment in the opening scene when they're kids of him snapping and actually hitting the bully with his cane.
Right.
Okay, so he's got an evil streak.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he's the jaded friend who feels like he's not sharing, Morbius isn't sharing this information with him that could potentially give him power.
Right.
Which they also established that he likes to have power because they established that somehow, I don't think they explain how.
They didn't, yeah.
He has become extremely rich.
Right.
So, yeah, that's just by the book, paint by number, having the beautiful side associate who is assisting him, and of course they end up falling in love, and it's just so by the number. And then the mentor of both of them, well, of course, the one has to betray him and turn on him. Yeah, it is very by the book, and that's my biggest problem. I think if you fleshed out a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
If you had, I don't know what else you could have done, but if you had a different villain, perhaps. Yeah. I just don't know what else because he's supposed to be the villain. Morbius is supposed to be the villain.
Right. And I guess they couldn't really, they couldn't use the story they already have with Venom, where it's like, well, when he's more, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of an idea where you've got the good guy battling the bad guy. I didn't feel like that they had that. There wasn't that inner turmoil at all.
Not enough of it.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Not enough of it. I mean, they teased
it at the beginning.
I've said this throughout the episode. They tease a lot. Because there's even the time where Martine, cuts herself when she's feeding the cat, and the blood drops, and you've got Morbius battling, smells the blood, and she's having to calm him down. And again, that's like, okay, this is a moment that needs to be developed.
Right.
Him battling the evil side of him a little bit more, and there was just I can't put my finger on it. There's there's stuff missing from this movie. There is another story that could have been told that would have made more sense, and I just don't know. I don't know what it could have been. I mean, make him the villain. Like, just make him the villain. There's nothing that says we can't follow the villain.
Right.
Like, make him the villain. make it more of, like you're saying, the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, where maybe sometimes he just cannot control the vampire side of him. Let Martine be the love interest in that she's calming him and she tries to control him.
And let there be a dramatic conflict too, where she wants to love him for the man he is, but she sees what he becomes when he's Morbius, and having to reconcile those two parts of him, and can she love him as both of those things and not just the one? Because then you gotta look at, like you said, if he goes back, if he loses that ability of being the vampire, then he goes back to being crippled. Not to say she can't love him in that state, but to see him be able to do other things. Which is
what Martine is in the comics. I mean, she loved him. Again, they were engaged before he turned into a vampire.
But if you could have given the FBI, the cops, their characters, like where they were really pursuing, almost like The Fugitive, almost like where they're trying to.
So that's what I was going to get into, because when they see the video footage that shows that it's Milo and not him, then there's the news thing that talks about, or is it a copycat?
Right.
What if there actually was just a human being serial killer who decided to start framing Morbius, and that's what it ultimately, like, that's your big climactic ending,
right?
Is that Morbius finally discovers this other serial killer, and it's the battle between him trying to prove his innocence, going after this other serial killer, while Stroud and Rodriguez is chasing him,
right?
Yeah,
and trying to convince them that he wasn't.
That's great.
Yeah. So
you found it, Tim. You found it. If this movie had been less like a superhero comic book movie and more like The Fugitive, oh man, that would have been much better.
Oh yeah, I'd watch that all day.
Absolutely, that would have been much better. And that would have also worked with my whole thing of Stroud, and Stroud being a bigger part of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then imagine him popping up again, with Werewolf by Night.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's it. You nailed it. Someone get Kevin Feige on the phone.
Right.
Tim's got an idea.
I am curious. I will say, I am curious to know what the original cut of the movie was. Like, what was all changed? Like, what it could have been. And maybe it's not any better, but I'm just curious of what changes they had to make, or they chose to make, to try to make it a quote-unquote better version that still didn't work.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many deleted scenes are on the Blu-ray, because I'm just going to go ahead and admit, I don't own this movie.
One of the few.
Yeah, it is. It will be purchased, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. And they may not have put those things on the Blu-ray because maybe they don't want us to see that.
Didn't want to upset fans even more.
Right, exactly.
Look what you could have had.
Right.
So, all right, let's just go ahead and get into it. Bag it, stack it, or trade it. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I'm trading this one. Give me something else, please, quickly.
Yeah. This is a trade it for me too. Again, like I said, from the opening with that. Again, first off, even the credits with that V flying at you and all that. It just it looked. Oh, and then after the cave scene, that weird circle reveal. Scene, like that transition.
Yeah. I was like,
it was so weird.
I'm like, am I watching the Pink Panther? What is going on?
It was, but that alone, and which for that to be the beginning of your movie, made it feel so low budget.
Yes.
Like, made it feel like you're just watching I wouldn't necessarily say sci-fi movie, but you're watching like a BBC movie.
Right.
With some good quality, performances and but there's just something about it. It felt like a TV movie.
Yes, it did. It did, and a lot of parts.
Yes, higher quality effects, but it felt like a TV movie. The best thing it has going for it, as we've talked about, is the runtime. Yeah, it is an hour and 44 minutes. It doesn't feel long. It moves. Yeah. So you don't feel like you've wasted time per se, because if you want to see it, then you can see it and not feel like you've...
Wasted your whole afternoon.
You've wasted your whole afternoon, yeah. This is a little off recording with Tim and I talking earlier. It's not the Eternals.
Yeah, I was trying not to bring it up.
So, no. We briefly were talking about the Eternals before we started recording. It's not the Eternals with an almost 3-hour runtime, and you feel every minute of that 3 hours.
Every minute, yeah.
So, all right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. This is the end of year 3 for Moving Panels, and I thank Tim, who helped me start it all 3 years ago. So thank you. And what you got coming up on the 80s Flick Flashback?
Well, first of all, you're very welcome. I'm glad to know that you've made it to year 3. Looking forward to year 4. You're doing a great job with the podcast. Keep up the good work. So I'm actually starting season 7. I don't go full years. I did the first, I started in April and went all the way to the end of 2020 when I started. That was my first season. And then I've kind of broke it up 2 seasons a year. So I am beginning to start season 7, which is one of the fun times of the year because we'll jump into October and get to cover some scary movies, and then we get a little bit more family friendly in November and December with the Christmas season. So, but I really excited about what I got coming up. So we've got Dead Poet Society, which is going to kick off the season. So that'll come out at the end of this weekend. Of course, Laramy is on that episode as he's been on. He's been the most the person I've had as a co-host the most of the podcast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I was looking at when I was tagging my co-hosts in episodes. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yeah. And then him and Nicholas, so it's always fun when the three of us get together. So we talked about Dead Poet Society, which is a great movie from the 80s. And then Laramy will be back. We're going to watch Creepshow, or redo Creepshow, which is based on somewhat comic related.
Yeah. It's inspired by comics, but it's not based on a comic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one that I don't think I've actually seen. I think I've seen Creepshow too. So I'm excited to go back and watch that one. Got Stephen King in it, and different directors and stuff. So
Ted Danson,
yeah,
Leslie Nielsen.
Oh yeah. So so we're gonna hit that one to kind of kick off the Halloween season, the beginning of October. So, but yeah, good stuff. So check us out. We're gonna have some fun.
Yeah, exciting. And of course, I will have Tim back. For those of you who remember, we did our 90s bracket about a month or so ago. And Tim and Nicholas are both going to come back so we can talk about our winner, Men in Black. Sorry, Blake. But I'm going to have them back. I'm also going to have Justin Baker coming in our first review of year 4. And we're going to talk in one of the other 90s movies. We're going to talk Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
There you go.
So that one's exciting. So expect that one coming for year 4 of Moving Panels. And we are in year 4, we will do our 100th review. Again, I know I do one shot. You release every other week. I release every week.
Right.
You're
going to hit 100 before me. Yeah.
Yes, but no. So.
Oh, no, probably not.
No, yeah. I've already hit 100 episodes.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's because of all of my one-shots. But I won't hit my 100th review episode until I think it's May.
Yeah.
Is when I will hit that.
I need to look. No, I haven't hit 100 yet, but I've done bonus episodes that I don't consider like full regular episodes. So my 100th episode will come up early 2024. So I'm still figuring out exactly what I'm going to do for that episode. I want to do something fun, but I haven't nailed down exactly what I'm going to do yet. I'm trying not to steal your idea, but I'm not going to tell everybody yet.
Yeah, we're not gonna spoil ours yet. We'll wait until that gets closer. But thanks, Tim, for joining me. Thanks everybody for listening. Rate and review the show. Get the word out there. Help spread both the 80s Flick Flashback and Moving Panels, as well as all the other podcasts that all of our co-hosts are part of. But thank you everybody for listening. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.